Greetings everyone, I'm Kevin and it's time to do a little reading wrap up weekly. What? As you know, last week I didn't do a weekly wrap up of my reading. I did not have a good time. I had a panic attack on Friday and I was just completely exhausted the entire weekend. So I didn't do that, but I decided that I'm gonna do weekly wrap ups on Sundays so that you can so you're aware that they're gonna be up on Sundays instead of Saturdays, because that makes a lot more sense. But there are a few books that I have finished within these past few weeks. So this is the first book that I finished these past 2 weeks. I gave it 2 stars. The thing is, the reason I gave this only 2 stars is because I really enjoyed the idea of this book. The entire the world building is beautiful. I think that idea is really intriguing, but the thing that really didn't work for me with this book is the fact that our main character, she's called Nancy, and she goes, all of these kids in this place have gone to a different world, in a world that is kind of made for them in a lot of ways. And she went to the Hall of the Dead, and she spends the entire book longing to return to the Hall of the Dead. And I know that I wasn't the only one who saw this book as a metaphor for suicide and suicidal ideation, that Nancy wanting to go to the Hall of the Dead and being in the Hall of the Dead and just wanting to go back there. The thing is that it's almost been 20 years since my first suicide attempt, and I spent a very long time wanting to die. And so I am in a better place today. But I know that if I read this book when I was younger, I still feel like I relate to Nancy because of that, because I remember what it was like to long for death. And going to the Hall of the Dead, being dead, it was something that I longed for. And I understand how she's feeling because I felt that. But that's my issue with the book, that if I had read this when I was younger, it would have made an impact on me that is not a good impact. I think this book is dangerous to people who are suicidal. I think if you read this book and you are suicidal, this book is extremely dangerous, and that's why I gave this book 2 stars, because I don't think people who have gone through that should read this. The second book that I finished is The AI Who Loved Me. It took me too long to finish this book. It's a very short audiobook. It's an exclusive Audible original, so it's only an audiobook. You can buy it physically. And now so it's gonna be a romance book between a human and a robot. I'm here for it. At that time, I just felt I just want something light and easy to read that is kind of a cute romance with a sci-fi element, and I got so much more than that. It's really not what I expected it to be. It's not so much focused on the romance, it's more focused on the bad society and kind of issues in society and how people are being treated and stuff like that. So it's a big thing. This book was more plot driven than character driven in some ways, and I gave this book 4 stars. I thought it was okay. I thought it was good. I enjoyed the world in this. I thought the world building was great. I think the reveals at the end of the book were really good. I had not seen that coming, but I expected it to be more of a rom-com than an espionage book set in the future. So that's kind of why I gave it 4 stars instead of 5. Then the third book that I read was Timekeeper, and I gave this book 3 stars. I thought it was okay. I thought it was fine. It's a fine book. It's a complete okay book. I thought it was fun, but I never woke up and felt I have to keep reading. It was not like that. I felt at times I wanted the chapter to be over so I could do other things. And that's not a good sign, in my opinion. Like, I want to be completely into a book. And when I feel like I want it to be over, it's not going to be higher than a 3-star, no matter how much I feel like this is a good book. If I don't enjoy it that much that I want to keep going, that I want to know what happens next, then it can't get higher than a 3-star. So I gave this book 3 stars. Then last weekend, as I said, like I was exhausted. I didn't have a lot of energy because of like a panic attack. It drains you. So I decided I'm gonna read something short and easy, relatively easy. And so I read Tänk dig att fly by Pim van Hest and Aron Dijkstra. This is too big to fit on the screen. It's huge. It's the tallest book on my bookshelves. It's about, like, I know that the English title that they use, it's not translated to English yet, but the English name that the authors use is On the Run. In Swedish, it's Imagine Fleeing. And what this book is about is kind of like a mental play that imagine that all of these things are happening to you and you have to leave your country, you have to leave everything that you know and go to a place where some people are welcome and some people don't want you to be there. And this book, I gave this book 5 stars because, like, reading this book, I actually ended up crying. Like, of course I'm gonna end up crying. This is a story that is telling a refugee story from a child's perspective, and it's kind of written for children, so it's very easy for them to understand. It never goes deeper than what a child would understand, and I thought it was brilliantly written, and I cried because this makes me like understand my family a lot more. Like, there are just certain things that you have in a family when someone in your family flees a war, it doesn't matter where they fled from, you will understand other people who went through that. Like, I have a lot of understanding for people who have someone who was a war refugee who came to Sweden, for example. I have a lot of like understanding for what they went through because I know what my family went through. I know the things that my dad grew up with, having a dad who fled a war. Because like when you come to a country seeking opportunity for your kids, like his mom did that. Like, she took her kids to Sweden so that they would have better opportunities. And my grandpa went and became a surgeon. And so my dad also had that, like, you have to go to university and get an exam. And that's not what it's called, graduate. You have to graduate college. And like me and my siblings went through that as well, that you have to do that. And there were certain career options that weren't options because they're hobbies. And that is something that you have when you come from that kind of, like, when you have a family member who fled a war, there are certain things that are what you should do. And like, I relate a lot to that, and I see that a lot working, that when you are an immigrant and you have like someone with immigrant background, especially when it's a war immigrant, like a war refugee, that you have a child, you have a parent who was a war refugee, or you have a grandparent who was a war refugee. The culture in your family and what is acceptable career options and what is not is very similar, no matter if your ancestor fled from, like, what country they fled from. You get it in a different way than if someone would immigrate from a country for like a working immigrant, or just someone who decides like, oh, it would be really nice to live in this country. Like, there are a lot of people in the EU, like the European Union, who move around because we're allowed to. So there are people from Great Britain who immigrated to Sweden, and they don't have to, immigrate because it's unsafe, and like that kind of stuff. The way that war refugees immigrate for. Like the reasons that war refugees immigrate to another country is not the same reason that someone would immigrate for work or for other things that people immigrate for today within Europe. So I just felt really touched by this. Like I ended up crying at the end of this because I was so touched, and like it really impacted me because this is something that I feel like would be great to help kids understand what refugees go through. And knowing my grandpa's story and how he came to Sweden and what he left in Germany gives me a better, I see the connections between what he went through and what happens to this girl in this book. So I gave it 5 stars. And the last book that I have finished in these past 2 weeks was Nils Holgerssons Underbara Resa genom Sverige. I gave it 5 stars. It was beautiful, and I love the mythical elements of this. Like you can see the hints of folklore, and especially in the beginning of the book. And I really enjoy how they went through Sweden and the friendship that Nils has with the geese. I thought was, or geese. Is it called geese or geese? I don't know. Like the goose. So it should be geese, I guess. Anyways, not the time for an English lesson, but I really enjoyed that, and it's it was a very nice read. I loved how they went through Sweden and the way the writing style of it, it was that kind of, old fairy tale that you grew up with in Sweden. That's how it felt. It felt nostalgic, and I remember watching the movie of this when I was younger. A lot of people in Sweden, a lot of kids grow up with this movie, especially my generation. If you're a 90s kid, you probably grew up with it. If you're from the 90s, if you were born in the 90s, you probably have watched it as well. I don't know that much for the people born after the year 2000. I don't know if it's too old for them or not, but I grew up watching that movie, and it was just very nostalgic for Swedish culture. Reading that book, it was nice. It was really nice, and I gave it 5 stars because of all of that. And they went to my region, which I didn't expect them to come here, but they did, and I liked what they had to say. Yeah, so that's all the books that I have read these past 2 weeks. I hope you enjoyed. Please leave a like and subscribe if you haven't, and I will see all of you next time. Good reading. Bye.